Hey everybody, this is Mike Van Meter and welcome to the Recovery is Possible show. And guys, today I'm really excited here, even though it is Friday the 13th. I don't know if you guys know that, but It is Friday the 13th. But I am up in Maryland at Ashley Addiction Treatment Center, and this is a special place for me. And those of you that listen to this show know that about a year ago, I talked to a gentleman named David Nassif, and we talked about the history of Ashley, because if you're familiar with the addiction world, Father Joseph Martin is really a staple of the recovery community, and people that have been around. It's rare for people to be in the recovery community and not have heard of him. But this is the very place where he worked. He was really the influence behind starting Ashley, and so it's a really, really great place for me. I also went through treatment here a little over 10 years ago, so it's a special place for me personally. And I am here today talking to the co-CEOs, Alex Dentsman and Dr. Greg Hobelmann, and we're going to be talking to them today, not so much about the history of Ashley, but about where Ashley is today in the future, because there are a lot of exciting things going on at Ashley, and I'm honored to be here today. I appreciate the invitation from you guys having me up here at Ashley.
Great to have you.
And I know I get asked about Ashley quite a bit from patients that I work with now, and they're always asking me, well, what is the future? What's the future of recovery? What about medically assisted treatment? What about all the different programs that are out there, and where do we start? Because a lot of times I have patients that will come in and talk to me, and they have zero experience in 12 steps, in Dharma, and Celebrate Recovery, and all the different programs that are out there. So a lot of questions out, and maybe you guys can help us out with that. But let's start off with introducing yourselves, talking about what your role is here, and then we'll get into where Ashley is and where it's going. So maybe start with Alex.
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Alex Dentsman, as Mike noted. I'm one of the co-CEOs here, and Greg and I have served in these positions for close to 2 years, and both happy to do so. Both have worked at Ashley for a number of years prior. So while Greg oversees all the direct care services, all the clinical, medical, nursing teams, and so forth, I support him in seeing all the non-direct care teams, such as finance and HR and business development and all those things. So like Mike, I got sober at Ashley. Now it's a patient here in 2003. So it's particularly rewarding for me to work here and help oversee our mission and ensure we can create as much access as possible for those in need. And happy to have you here.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, and I'm Greg Hobelmann. So the other co-CEO, as Alex mentioned, I do oversee most of the patient care activities. I did not attend treatment here at Ashley, but I went through 2 treatments in 2009, 2011. And prior to that, I was doing anesthesiology and pain management. I came up to Ashley in between my treatments as a staff physician, fell in love with the place, fell in love with the patients, the community, but I did relapse, and I went to treatment in 2011, and then I went back and retrained as a psychiatrist and got back here in 2016. So over that time, I came back as a staff psychiatrist, and then just sort of raised my hand for various duties, and ultimately, over the past few years, we've developed into this co-leadership model that works really well for us here.
Oh, great. Now, you mentioned, and actually a good way to start this off is I hear from a lot of patients, because I work in a detox center right now, a lot of patients coming through. We'll have a patient leave and a week later come back. This idea of relapse. Now, you mentioned relapsing a couple of times. That was true in my story as well. And of course, relapse does not have to be a part of someone's story, but oftentimes it is. In fact, probably more often than not. Could you maybe address that a little bit? And so somebody that's listening to this podcast that is going through that and going through this relapse, and they become frustrated, from a medical standpoint, maybe shed some light on that?
Yeah, I think it goes back to, is substance use disorder a disease? We don't have to talk about that. It doesn't really matter, but it fits very well into the medical model of what we think of as a chronic disorder or disease. And the nature of chronic disorders is a relapse and remit. As you noted, it does not have to be part of the picture or part of a person's story, but it very frequently is. And when you compare it to other chronic diseases, it's much the same, The great thing is, like those other diseases, it can be treated very well. So it's largely dependent on the person and where they are, and we talk about these things in the 12 steps all the time, in AA or whatever 12-step program it might be. But you do have to start with honesty, open-mindedness, willingness, understanding where you are, acceptance of where you are, so that you can really start the journey to recovery. And part of that, is as people do that in part ways, or they're doing things that aren't necessarily the best for their recovery, relapses do happen.
Yeah. I know for me, and I have patients ask me all the time, because I'm pretty open about my own recovery. They always say, well, what's sort of the secret sauce? What did you do to get on this run of sobriety? And in my case, it's a little over 10 years now. You touched on it. I think that part of it, well, not part of it, all of it is that willingness and that honesty, that willingness to be able to take direction from those that have traveled this path and have gotten well. Because after all, addiction is a disease of the mind and the body. There's that genetic pre-uploading. There's psychological aspects to it. There's a lot of different factors to it. And it's the disease that you have that tells you that you don't have the disease. So we have to attack it from the medical the physiological portion, but then also from the psychological portion. And oftentimes, and I hear this, and I know here at Ashley, when I interned here, I would hear it from the patients as well. Like, hey, Mike, I hear you saying that, but here's what works for me, or here's what I prefer to do. And there's that fine line, and I'll get, your opinions on this, that fine line between, having the freedom to make your own decisions, and you should make your own decisions when you come into recovery, but it really is important to listen to those that have been successful, because the people that have been successful in recovery generally do the same things. Recovery is individual, but it really is of people doing the same things and having that openness and that willingness to follow the successful path, which is not picking up a drug or a drink. And that's the hard part. And I know you guys are doing a lot of work in looking at this, and particularly with medically assisted treatment in the beginning, because that may be helpful to a patient in getting some medical assistance, particularly in that first year. What kinds of things are you guys doing with that? And what sort of success rates are you seeing?
Well, I'll tell you, the first thing is even how we conceptualize it, we call it medication-assisted treatment. And we actually use the term medication-supported recovery, because ultimately what we're looking for is someone to get into that place of recovery. And as you noted, there are certain essentials that are needed for someone to get to that place. They're not necessarily sufficient, but they are essential. That is that honesty, open-mindedness, acceptance, willingness piece. But we want to look at each individual, and we want to treat them according to where they are and what their needs are. Medication is inherent to treatment of a disorder, so we don't think it's assisting treatment. We think it's just inherently part of it. So when we look at medications, we say we want to have everything available that we might be able to use in any particular case. So we want to have all the tools to treat patients. And over the past 5 years, we've really gotten there. We have all of that. Our ability to treat patients with sort of gold standard care, with anything that we possibly can, we're able to do it now, which is great.
Yeah, and along with that is aftercare, right? And here at Ashley, you have a lot of opportunities for aftercare too, don't you?
Yeah.
When it comes to intensive outpatient, sober living houses.
Yeah, so I think part of our mission these past 5-6 years in growing access and reaching a bigger audience, because we know the prevalence of substance use disorders has only grown in recent years. So part of how we've had to evolve is grow our continuum. So for a long time, we'll be 40 years old next Tuesday. So at the timing of when this is being recorded. So in mid-January, we'll be 40 years old. So for 32 of those years, Ashley sort of existed as a traditional inpatient program. And we offered, family services and a prevention program for kids and a variety of things, but generally we existed one way. We understood the importance about 6 years ago of opening outpatient locations, so we're really fortunate to have two outpatient clinics, one about 20 miles north, one about 20 miles south, and they're more community facing, and they accept medical assistance, and we're really proud of that because we can reach more people. So there are people who otherwise could not access care here, not just for financial reasons, just because residential treatment is just can be sort of disruptive. We understand the value in it, but not everyone's in a position where they can go to treatment for 28, 30, 35 days. So it allows us to treat more patients. The other thing we've done in recent years is add extended care programming to our continuum, meaning if a person is in our care or if they do primary treatment elsewhere, they can get anywhere from 2 to 3 months of additional treatment, which we see to be really important and useful for some people who require more time in a residential setting. So happy about all those things.
Yeah, I mean, we really want to have that full continuum because we want to keep people engaged. One of the few things we know for sure is that continued engagement improves outcomes, and we want to have the ability to do that within our system and really keep them close to Ashley, keep them engaged in our programming, and if not here, keep them engaged, in other programs, and ultimately, in whatever is beneficial to their recovery, such as mutual self-help groups, so that those patients' outcomes can improve.
Right. With COVID, we've seen the advent of online meetings as well. In your IOP programs, is it both in person and online?
It is, yeah. So credit to our IOP staff, Janet Goulia in particular, who, when COVID started, we didn't know the duration, or I was still obviously living in it, but they stood up a telehealth system rather quickly. I think in the course of just a couple of weeks, so we were able to move the patients in our care at that time to telehealth. That poses, some advantages for some and challenges for others. So it's sort of a mixed bag, and we're, I think, all really interested to see what role telehealth will play moving forward. We plan to keep it and continue to offer it because it's proven useful to some. And currently, we offer a hybrid. So we have some services which are live and in person, and that's great. And we have some services that remain virtual. It's great for those people who can experience us that way. And then also we have 12-step support group meetings for alumni, and they're incredibly well attended. So even after 2+ years, it's one of the most sort of successful endeavors we've experienced the past number of years during COVID.
Yeah, and are you still doing the alumni programs?
Yeah, we are. We're at an interesting point now where we're starting to kind of imagine a somewhat return to normalcy, whatever that means, in 2023, and how do we reintroduce some of those things which served us so well in the past, and learn from our experience during COVID to sort of bring some of those things forward. So I'm not sure we ever would have understood the value in offering telehealth or understood the benefit to our alumni in offering online meetings, but COVID led us to those things, and we're going to carry a lot of those things forward. Yeah,
I know I used to attend the meetings down in my area quite a bit. That's something that I really appreciated about Ashley, was having that continued contact after you left. And I think that is important, whether it's done here or whether it's done somewhere else, that when I work with the patients now, particularly in the detox center, it's always the same story. I was going to meetings, I was in a community, whatever that community may be, I was doing that, and then I stopped. And then I relapsed. Right. Addiction is isolation, recovery is community, and there is just such. Ashley, I know in this area, particularly in the East Coast, when you walk into a recovery room and you mention Ashley, everybody knows.
Right.
Everybody in the recovery world has heard of Ashley. I know when I did my graduate program, which was another program, when I told them I was interning at Ashley, it was, oh my gosh, Ashley, that's fantastic. So, and it sounds like you guys are really continuing that legacy of being out front and being sort of creating the new paths in the recovery world. And if you could, there are a lot of not just technology, but even concepts that are new from the time I was here. Could you maybe discuss some of those?
Well, I think if you go back to 10 years ago, this was, as Alex was describing, a 28-day abstinence-based program, and it was sort of a one size fits all. And then we did have continuing care and tried to hook people up with resources afterwards, but we're looking to do that in a much better way. And over the past 10 years, there's been a tremendous amount of change. We've learned a lot. there's really no silver lining to the opioid epidemic, but it has brought some increased awareness into substance use disorders and into the true individual and societal burden of it. But we have looked at what are the evidence-based modalities that we know are effective in treatment, and we want to have those here. So we did bring buprenorphine, which is agonist treatment for opioid use disorder, and we brought that to our campus for those who have been struggling and are appropriate, and it's where it's indicated. We will start people on maintenance of that medication. We are able to treat patients on methadone here now. We work with their opioid treatment program outside, but they come here for treatment. We will continue their methadone while they're getting the psychosocial support and treatment that they need to overcome whatever other addictions are in their lives. So we have really opened our mind up to any means that has been shown to be effective. And I will say, as we were talking before we jumped on this, that the 12-step and mutual self-help programs are incredibly effective.
Yep.
And there's been more and more research coming out recently. Dr. John Kelly has done a lot of that research to show the effectiveness of 12-step groups. And it's really important. And it goes back to creating that sense of community and providing enriched environments for people and connections for people, because we know that that's quite effective in long-term recovery.
I mean, part of how we look at this too, we think Ashley's sort of the best of both worlds, right? So we have this time-tested approach. We've got an almost 40-year legacy at this point. So we've operated well and ethically for all these years. But we're also kind of leaning into this opportunity to sort of reimagine, what treatment can look like. So how do we take those best elements, bring those forward? It's like COVID. There are so many kind of parallels when we talk about COVID, our overall strategic plan. What can we bring forward, and how can we evolve and adapt? So we're at a point now, medication and the use of it, this is no longer controversial. Alternative sort of forms of treatment like outpatient and extended care, that's not unusual now. Like all these things are just very standard, So this is kind of I think a fortunate time for us to be in these roles as leaders, because we have access to such a great deal. But the other flip side of that is we're leaning into this being a real cutting edge addiction medicine provider, and whether that's the research, which I'm sure you'll ask Greg to speak to in a moment, but there's opportunities for us to really just deepen what we do and how we do it.
I'm glad to hear that, because I know it's interesting. When I went through my graduate program to do this work, I talked about a lot of things, studied a lot of things. The one thing that we did not spend a lot of time talking about was how can we take the existing models for recovery, and maybe you can address this as we get into that subject, and that is looking at the long-term, like the number of people, percentage of people that get into long-term recovery, right? And that's sort of like in our world, the addiction world, that's kind of like the finding the cure to cancer, so to speak. The person that can unravel that will get the Nobel Peace Prize. If you can, what is it that we can do to get you abstinent and get you into long-term recovery, right? But the one thing that was not talked about a whole lot in my graduate program, and it surprised me, was, are our current models effective? And if not, and I think we could argue that they are not, by and large, nationwide, worldwide actually, why? Let's take a harder look at these programs, and let's devote the time to improve the outcomes. It sounds like you guys are doing that. And so tell me if I'm missing the mark on that. The success rates, and then what you are, and I don't mean here at Ashley, I just mean worldwide, and then talk about the research and where are we going with that to improve it.
There's a lot there, Mike.
That's a big question.
It's a big question. Yeah. There's a lot to it, but you kind of think of substance use disorder and the field of treatment of substance use disorder. I call it as the redheaded stepchild or the redheaded stepchild. So you have somatic medicine, and then you have mental or behavioral health, as the redheaded stepchild, and then the substance use disorder treatment as as a subset of that. But for a large period of time in the 20th century and early 21st century, it was largely ignored with regard to outcomes and creating evidence-based medicine approaches and so forth. Now that has to do with how treatment evolved, and it evolved largely outside of the healthcare system during the 20th century. And so we understand very well that we have to know what our outcomes are. How is what we are doing working? Now, you mentioned that, that we don't have really good success rates, but that's arguable. If you look and compare it to other diseases, we have pretty good success rates, and what is ultimately the outcome that we want? Because, you talk about being abstinent and in long-term recovery, they're actually two separate things. So recovery, we have to really define what recovery is and what those metrics are, because recovery also can include a reduction in use, which then improves our relationships, improves our ability to work, improves our general mental health, reduces our anxiety, gives us peace of mind, improves our resilience, all of these things. So we want to be looking at those outcomes to see how we're doing. So we have to really come from a different angle, instead of saying, hey, did you use or did you not use, and saying, no, we have better measurements of recovery, and it really is a full spectrum. So there has been a large push, rightfully so, and it should be, on getting those outcomes. But we're early. We're way behind the medical world. We're way behind the behavioral mental health world as well in doing that. But there's a really great effort, and we certainly are a huge part of that effort. So about 3 years ago, we really did decide we want to, maybe it was 4 years ago, 3-4 years ago, say we have to be doing this. There's no question about it. And so we looked at who we could partner with and how we could do it. And so we have some faculty from Johns Hopkins who work with us and are very dedicated to the work that they do up here. And then we have built some internal staff to really build a research program to not only look at our outcomes, but also to design studies to learn more about what is effective and what interventions can we implement in the future to improve those outcomes. But we do have to know the outcomes first.
Yeah.
So we use a variety of means to do that, and it consists of looking at publicly available data and asking questions about that. It consists of really following our patients over time to get some long-term data, and follow-up has always been an issue. People, return to use, they tend not to provide that follow-up. So that's why it's been so difficult to get those outcomes. And then we're looking at, really innovative stuff, like looking at biometrics, the work that we're doing with Whoop and putting, Whoop straps on patients and looking at what's happening with their sleep and sleep architecture and their heart rate variability, and their resting heart rate and so forth, to see, how they're doing in their recovery. So it's really neat when you combine a variety of different outcome measures and look at it. And then we want to tie those back to how do we use them clinically. So when patients see that and they see that they're making improvements, potentially provide greater motivation. And ultimately what we would like is to figure out what the predictive models are. So if we can predict when a person is struggling, and may return to use, we can intervene at that point. So we have a lot of, big ideas and big thoughts, and we have a really good infrastructure here to start doing that work, and we have started doing it, but it's going to be a long-term project.
It is, and the nice thing about it, one of the things I think has changed over the last 10 years is sort of the public perception of addiction. Because I know when I came into treatment, it was, put a brown bag over my head. I don't want anybody to know that I'm here. I don't, just the shame and the stigma that goes along with addiction. We still have that, but I think my perception is that it's becoming less, because I think COVID, if there's something else that COVID has done for us, is really highlight mental health issues and addiction issues. Sure. Because I think people understand that. The other thing that we did not have when I was here was fentanyl. I'd never heard of fentanyl when I was here, and actually now working in the detox center, the majority of patients are fentanyl patient. Yeah. It's when I have a patient come in now and I talk to them about their drug of choice and they say alcohol, and I'm, what else? Well, no, just alcohol. I'm shocked. I'm like, really? Just alcohol? That shows you how the world has changed, how our world has changed. With that, we are getting more and more people that are coming in and getting help and talking about community, and you do this. And so what I'm leading with this is, one of the things I like about Ashley is you do have support groups here. And in fact, you have small groups that are tailored to particular communities, whether it's professions, whether it's sexual orientation, and there's others, maybe senior communities and things like that. Those are new too. I don't remember those being here when I was here before. What was driving that? Is that helpful? And what kind of drove you into doing that?
It's a nice thing for us to offer. So we talk a lot about the importance of connection. I think you referenced earlier that alcoholism addiction, it's such an isolating illness that if we have 100 patients in care today, we have 100 very unique stories and experiences, but I think the thing they shared is that feeling of isolation and that lack of connection with their support systems, with their families, with their communities. So that's something we want to create for people. So we think there's this larger community that they can feel some level of connection with, and that's the patient community overall. But we also see opportunities to create these smaller pockets within the patient community where people with shared experiences, shared interests, shared ways of identifying can connect, because you talked about that language of the heart, right? That connection piece. I think sometimes the connections patients make with each other, hearing other people's experiences, are as impactful as the connections they make with our staff and the education, so to speak, because that's where you can really draw a great deal of inspiration and hope from. And that's one thing I really appreciate about our staff. You don't have to be in recovery to work here, but a lot of our staff are, and we have our own experiences which we share quite freely. I think that's where that inspiration, that hope really happens for a lot of our patients. But to your point, those smaller groups, whether it's for professionals or for older adults, we call it the silver group, So
yeah. I'm in that category, by the way. I'm in that category, if you can't tell.
So for our experienced folks, so it's just nice because they can connect, and their life challenges or things they have to experience when they leave here, that we want them to have a safe space to process those things and prepare accordingly.
Yeah, and you talk about the differences between 10 years ago and now. I mean, I think that a lot of the thought of 10 years ago was, let's get someone address their substance use disorder, get them stabilized so that they can continue their recovery, begin them on a path towards recovery. And we like that, we love it, we know that it works. But right now, we're not seeing this as, there's no such thing as treating substance use disorder alone, or in a box. People have a variety of issues, the mental health issues, the personality issues, their family of origin issues, and that stuff really does have to be addressed. So by creating these groups, you do help people to connect, you do help people to identify with each other, and get them started on that plane in a different way. And of course, looking at, doing a thorough evaluation, understanding those patients well, because often there are mental health needs that need to be addressed. And even if it's somebody with only a diagnosis of substance use disorder, there are plenty of symptoms that are there.
Right.
So how do we address them the best way? And again, it's not a one size fits all model.
Yeah, and really getting people to. You relate to the entire patient population, of course, but I also like the fact that you do have, in the small groups, there are certain groups where, just take, for example, pilots and government folks, law enforcement folks. You have specific groups for that because that's important. I know from my own experience in coming in, that can be a real... addiction can be isolating, but then if you're somebody that came from my profession, that can be even more isolating. And that was certainly not a group that existed when I was here. And I absolutely see the value of it. And so I really like that.
I mean, over the years, we've worked really closely with a number of airlines and the FAA. And so the airline industry, we feel honored. They put a lot of trust in us. And obviously a lot of people's, safety and, personal well-being depends on these pilots being sober and supported and in good recovery. So we've worked with them quite a lot over the past few years, but it's always been part of what we've done. And I think it just gives us some insight as to, what these guys and gals need post-treatment. And they are very fortunate because the support they get from airlines, from their peer pilots, the monitoring, the accountability that creates. I mean, talk about success rates. I mean, if the world could replicate sort of what the airline industry does, or what physicians and other healthcare providers do, it's pretty inspiring to see the success rates among those groups.
Yeah, I noticed that when I was here, because when I interned, that was one of the semesters I worked with that particular population, and it really was that it appeared to me, and you correct me if I'm wrong, it seemed like they had the highest success rate. I think there's reasons behind that. They're strictly monitored for 2 years after they leave.
Plenty of skin in the game too.
A lot of support.
Their livelihoods depend on this, and but it's interesting. They have a group, but it's not an exclusive group to where they don't have ample interaction with the rest of the patient community.
Sure.
So it's not as if we're trying to sort of feed in this idea that certain people are special and deserve some certain type of treatment. Whether it's pilots or whomever, they might have 2 hours of programming in a given day, which is specific to them. But the rest of the day is spent in the community, with the larger patient population. And, candidly, I think that's what most people will experience when they leave here if they adopt a lot of the things that we recommend. They're going to need to embrace that sort of connection with, with a diverse group.
Absolutely. And you do need that. And I know I work with a lot of in my field, law enforcement and military, and when I work with people in 12-step, my own personal 12-step groups, and I'll have, police officers in particular will come up and say, hey, I just want to go to a police meeting. That's all I want to do. I'm going to work with you. I only want to, and in the beginning, in order to get them into the program, that's a good way to get them in. But then I try to work them out of that, because recovery is not about you and your particular population. Recovery is about you and everyone else, and being able to relate to everyone else, because this is not an us and them endeavor. This is you're interacting with the community. And oftentimes too, if you spend too much time with people that come from a particular community, you tend to talk about that. Like a lot of police specific meetings, it will tend to turn into shop talk as opposed to recovery talk. And I try to get them out of that, because when we come together and we talk, it is about recovery and getting well and dealing with it. Because after all, you're not going to be a police officer your entire life, or an airline pilot, or in the military your entire life. You that's going to end at some point, whether you make it end or because there's a certain age that you will have to leave. Now, what are you going to do from there? Does your recovery program end? It's a good place to start, but you have to.
It's people have a variety of identities, and their occupation could be an identity. So I think the huge value for me, when I went down I got treatment down in Talbot in Atlanta, and there were a lot of physicians down there, and the first thing was, I'm not the only one. I felt like, wow, because I did feel like that. I felt like I'm the only one.
I did too, yeah.
I felt completely isolated, alone, and that absolutely fed into my need, desire, whatever you call it, to use, And so the problem actually only got worse in that setting. So the initial value is, wow, I've got, people that just right away I can identify with that are doing well. The other thing is that there are certain needs, for particular groups. So, if you're talking about law enforcement, they go and see things that most people don't. So how are they dealing with that? There's value there. And I love how you said it. Ultimately we want to introduce them to the world of recovery. And, when you're sitting in an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, it's the ultimate equalizer. Everybody is there dealing with one particular issue, being vulnerable, and you really do start to. It's not a stop drinking program; it's a start living program, and you learn how to really live life. And the benefits of it are just tremendous, because it's a decrease in anxiety. It's an increase in joy and happiness. It's an ability to relate to folks in a much better way, to improve relationships. It goes on and on, the dividends that we get from recovery.
Yeah, and I think particularly over the last couple of years, I know the police officers I'm working with the whole defund the police movement, and really just sort of the cultural aspects of what has happened over the last couple of years. It's put police officers into a space where they feel like they're under attack from every direction. And so when they come into treatment, again, they already feel like they're isolated. They feel like they're the only one. They're not. You and I know that, but they think that.
Sure.
And I think that it's okay, that's that safe space where I can talk about what I'm going through, because it is unique. I often tell people, because of my background, not only am I a retired FBI agent, but I was a street police officer. We saw in one day, things that would put most people in therapy for the rest of their life.
Right.
In one day. Right. In one day, but you're doing this for year after year after year, and it really does jade you sort of your mental outlook. And So it makes sense to me that they would like to have people around them that kind of understand what they go through. Same is true with the military, same is true with the airline pilot, physicians, because a lot of times you'll have physicians or nurses that will come into the program, and they need to have that initial safe place. Now, in time, I know in my own recovery, and I'm sure with you as well, I became much more comfortable with my recovery, and I have no problem talking to anyone at any time about it. In fact, when I speak to the public, I often start out my talk with talking about how I'm in long-term recovery, and I have found that creates more connection than a divide. Because what I have found, maybe you have found this, is rarely, if ever, do I find someone that doesn't know someone that needs to be in recovery in their life. And there's so many people out there that need to hear the message that you and I are talking about.
Absolutely. I'm the same way. I think that there's tremendous power in vulnerability, and it allows us to connect, and that creates really good feelings, which promotes our recovery. So, I tend to very much be, open about this and inviting, of folks to know about what's happening with me. And over time in my recovery, what I experienced is that, at first there's this deep-seated shame, that feels terrible. And over time in good recovery, the pride in my recovery way supersedes the shame that I felt, And I think that what we're doing with regard to our recovery, we have to begin by reducing that shame, because if that shame persists, it's really, really hard to get into a life of good recovery.
Yeah, and it is something to be proud of, because I've done a lot of difficult things in my life. You, being a doctor, certainly have done very difficult things in your life, but getting into recovery, successful recovery, probably ranks up there.
Yeah.
Does it not?
Yep.
I'm no doctor. I can't speak for medical school.
I think that I will say the most difficult time in my life was the period of active substance use disorder and getting into good recovery. It took me 4 years from when I sort of had knowledge that, hey, this is a problem, I better do something about this, to finally getting into a place where I felt okay and could start that recovery process, and start feeling better. No question, it's the most difficult thing that I've done, but it's also paid more dividends than anything that I've ever done. Yeah. And I think what am I most proud of? It's the fact that I was able to achieve good recovery, and I'm continuing to live this life, which is also about, I have a value system. I'm living by that value system to the best of my ability. I understand that I'm human. I make mistakes. I can be vulnerable about those things. And ultimately, I can try to be, of service to others through taking care of myself first and foremost. I'm able to, to be available, for my wife, for my kids, for other family members, for patients, for friends. It's been a really, really wonderful journey.
Yeah. You said something earlier that I actually said to another patient recently that I think is very important to understand, that recovery in 12 steps in general, and even I guess you could talk about the program here, recovery is not necessarily about stopping drinking and drugging. It's about not starting drinking and drugging. And so, in detox, where I work right now, we stabilize those patients, get them safe, hopefully get them into a program like what you have here, stabilize them even further, and then educate them on the disease, and then the various methods of recovery programs that are out there. But then what people don't, maybe talk about this a little bit more, about that experiencing what life is all about, because recovery is about learning to live. You mentioned that. And then dealing with whatever other issues that we have, because we have the causes and conditions, right? The condition is we have that genetic predisposition, many of us do, or we've become addicted. That's the condition, right? But then the causes. For example, if you have a period of recovery, you and I, if we were to walk out of here today and go out and start drinking or drugging, after a decade, there was something that happened. And it wasn't because I had alcohol in my system and that created that obsession to drink. Once we put it into our bodies, it takes over. The disease takes over. It's not there after 10 years, at least not physiologically. If I walk out of here, there's something that will upset me. There's something that will disrupt my psyche that will cause me to want to go and escape, which is ultimately what addiction is, wanting to escape from being present, right? What are sort of your thoughts on that, and what do you do here at Ashley to prepare the patients for that mindset, that it's really about learning to live life on life's terms.
Yeah, I mean, that is the psychoeducation that goes on here. That's part of the group therapy. That's part of the individual therapy. That's part of the lectures. That's part of the experiential interventions that we do. I mean, it's baked into everything. I mean, because that is really the key. I think of recovery as learning to take care of yourself. Whatever that means, it's learning to take care of yourself. And the spiritual part of that is that you are doing those things that will ultimately get you to a place of serenity, peace of mind, calmness, ability to make good choices, good decisions. You think about why we drink, why we use drugs, and it usually starts off because someone suggested it to us, because it was a peer pressure piece to it, and we know the later that you start using substances, the less risk you have of developing a substance use disorder. We know there's some sort of genetic susceptibility. Some have more than others. We haven't perfected that yet, but we understand that there's that piece in there. At least that's our current understanding of it. And then we start to drink because we enjoy it. We like it. We like the effects that are brought on. And then over time, you end up drinking because it's relieving symptoms. Whatever symptoms there are. So, the substance, as we talk about all the time, is the substance use is a symptom of something else, and so it really is digging into that something else and finding out what that is, and you don't have to go back and look and say, oh, I drank because of this or I drank because of that. But let's take an inventory. Let's look at ourselves. Let's really truly understand ourselves so that we can be on that spiritual journey, of getting better and really realizing how to take care of ourselves. And that's the process that we're talking about, and that's what we're doing here with our treatment. In addition to providing the treatment for any medical disorders, any psychiatric disorders, any symptoms, and then building in, how do you create the connection with others and the community that is so vital for really maximizing or optimizing the experience of recovery.
Yeah, and let me ask you this. We talked about fentanyl a little bit, and we've had this explosion. We really have. You've clearly seen an uptick here in this treatment center from fentanyl. Is it more difficult, would you say, because I get asked this quite a bit from my own patients, and that is it harder to get off of something like fentanyl, which is something that's designed in a lab? Is there something about the work that it does in the recesses of the brain that makes that more difficult, or not? How would you compare that to, say, alcohol?
Substances do play a role. You look at certain processes in substance use disorder that are cross all substances, but you do want to look at individual substances. Really, it's more the category. So, how are opioids different than alcohol, different than benzodiazepines, different than stimulants? And, what is that withdrawal process? What is the post-acute withdrawal? While we're working on the generalities that have nothing to do with the actual substance, that part of recovery. But I think that we have to pay attention to those special populations and consider that when we're treating. So, of course, everything from medications to what we're discussing to how to prepare them for what they're going to experience and so forth. Fentanyl, is it unique from other opioids? Only with regard to its potency. Right. I mean, there are plenty of synthetic opioids out there that have been around there for a long time. Fentanyl is not new. In fact, I would say has been the drug of choice for anesthesiologists for decades.
Yeah, it has.
There's no doubt.
But they're administered by, hopefully, an anesthesiologist.
Well, to patients, but anesthesiologists with substance use disorders, fentanyl's the drug of choice.
Yes, yeah.
So it's been around for a long time. What happened is that, when you look at just the economics of it and the drug trade, something that is prohibited. Now we have increased the substance use disorder, the opioid use disorders, because we increased access to it in the late 90s, early 2000s. We created that access. People are going to take advantage of it. So, I've heard it called the iron law of prohibition from the book Chasing the Scream. It was really well described, which says when you prohibit something, typically that prohibited substance is going to become more potent over time. And the reason is because it's more easily transportable. Right now, what we're dealing with is not just fentanyl. It's all the analogs of fentanyl. Now, you've heard of some of them, whether it's sufentanil or carfentanil, but there are many others that have never been developed for use in human or animals. And those things are being created rapidly, and it's very dangerous. And this is what we're facing in the future. Same thing happened with cannabinoids. Same thing is happening with sedatives like benzodiazepines. The market for these other synthetic substances is vast. It's harder to track. It's harder to truly understand. It's going to be harder to treat because we don't know exactly what we're treating. It's incredibly dangerous. But that's, we're seeing that with fentanyl right now.
Yeah, and that's pretty scary, actually, thinking about the other drugs that are out there and it sounds like they could be developed and then abused.
Oh, they are.
Yeah.
I mean, there are, more drugs that we don't know about that have been created, in these various labs, that are analogs of these substances that are being sold, and people don't know what they're buying. They don't know what the exact effects are. They'll have somewhat varying effects.
Right.
You look at the synthetic cannabinoids, for example, or what were bath salts, which were cathinones, but these things have high potency, have real more significant effects on mental health, more significant effects while intoxicated, and there's a much higher danger level associated with them.
Now, are you seeing patients come in here with marijuana, of course, the spread of marijuana and the accepted use of it? Maybe some thoughts on that?
Yeah, for sure. So, as we see the access to marijuana increase, we're going to see an increase in cannabis use disorder. That's the nature of increasing access to a substance. And it's one of the things that we just have to consider and understand, as we are proceeding with policy and so forth surrounding it. Now, I do think that a very important distinction is the distinction between legalization, along with decriminalization, and what we're calling medical marijuana right now. And I think as a society, if we decide, hey, we understand the risks of legalizing and we decide to accept that, it's a decision that can be made, and we'll accept what that is. But we should educate people about what's happening with cannabinoids, where we are, the increase in the THC concentration, that's going to have different effects, how it affects the adolescent brain, how it affects the adult brain, all of that. We should really let people know that so that they can make an informed decision about their own use as it becomes legalized. Medical marijuana, unfortunately, was a pathway to getting it legalized, and that has come with a lot of misinformation, because what we're seeing is that really very few physicians prescribe marijuana, medical marijuana, because it's not a medicine. Now, there might be medicine in cannabinoids. In fact, there are some FDA-approved cannabinoids for certain conditions, such as cachexia associated, with cancer, and their effect is moderate. They haven't been widely used, and at some point we can study cannabinoids and create medicine. But right now, when you prescribe a medicine, you see a provider, who says, I want you to take this medicine at this dose, by this route, at this time, for this condition. Here's a prescription. I'll see you back again, and we'll decide, how to continue that, when to continue that, and measure its effects. What's happening with medical marijuana is you say, well, here's a card, take it for a variety of indications that haven't been proven. Some of those indications are actually things that cannabis will make worse over time. Indications are decided by states. You don't really know, how they came up with these indications. And by the way, you can take it by any route you want, at any dose you want, at any time you want, for the next year. And when you come back in a year, I'll, give you this card again. So it's not a medicine. It's not, and unfortunately that has been wrapped up and is, reduced, the concern over the negative effects of cannabis. So now we have a feeling, it's legalized, it must be safe. Look, we know alcohol is legal. It is not safe, right? We have to use it as safely as we can, but there are consequences from its use. We have to understand them and decide if we want to do that, and and make the the society as safe as we can if we decide to do that.
I think that's been my problem with it is it's been too easy for patients, and I heard it from patients here that were suffering from cannabis use disorder, and the patients where I'm at right now. You often hear them say, well, Mike, this can't be dangerous because I have a prescription for it. I have my medical marijuana card. And I think you are so much more articulate in explaining the issues behind that than I ever was or have been, although you just educated me, and I think I have a better argument with the patients now, because I think that that's a really, really good point. And I've often said, just like you did, and that is that our society, because that largely is a political issue, and I'm not going to get into the political issues, but we made a political decision that these things are going to happen, depending on the state that you're in. Right. Now, it's not true in all areas, but in many areas, right? I think my issue with that, even if the society decides that's the route we're going to go, we're going to legalize marijuana, we're going to do that. I've come in and said, okay, but if you're going to do that, can we at least be honest about it? And follow it up with, yes, this may be true, but we're not even talking about the problems that are associated with it, all the problems that you just described. And we're not being fair with the public about it. Because after all, if you drink alcohol, does it not warn you on the bottle of alcohol? If you pick up a pack of cigarettes, does it not tell you there's something on that pack of cigarettes explaining to you why you shouldn't be doing this? The same with chewing tobacco and a number of other items. But I've not seen that once, at least where I live, where, okay, if you do this, it may be legal. However, here's some things that you should know if you choose to do that. And I think that you were really articulate in explaining those issues.
Absolutely.
The public, because there's really an unsuspecting public
to understand, what is really there. And you think about powerful forces that are helping to kind of push that down, and to show another side, because ultimately, there's a lot of money to be made in that, and so we just have to see what the playing field is and help to educate the public so that we can make the decision that we ultimately want to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, guys, if you can take us out, maybe some parting thoughts on recovery or Ashley, the future, just some things that you want to get out to the public.
Yeah, I'll start. I think in some ways, just to be totally transparent, we feel as though there's a sort of period of uncertainty just post-COVID as we start to imagine what the substance disorder treatment field will look like, and how Ashley can best show up and obviously serve people and have an impact and fulfill our mission. But it's also a lot of opportunity in that too, where I think we've entered our roles at an important time, and obviously this is a milestone year for us. 40 years is no small feat, but the fact that we're in the strategic planning process and we're considering ways to improve what we do and ensure this is sustainable, and we could be here another 40 years and celebrate Father Martin and May's legacy and help as many people as possible. It's just a fun time to be in these roles. It's not always easy necessarily. We have our challenges just like any leader in this field does, but happy to be here and doing it at an organization like Ashley, and appreciate you giving us the opportunity to share a bit. No, I appreciate it, Greg.
I think what I hope to see in the future for Ashley is that, we absolutely provide the best care to individuals that we can, but we have a larger public health outlook that will help to inform how treatment can progress and how we can improve outcomes over time. And that's why we are putting our efforts in as we are. We cannot lose focus on those individuals and help each and every person that comes through here to the best of our ability to get better. But I think we can learn and we can have a larger impact. The other piece is that, everybody can recover. Anybody can develop a substance use disorder, and people can recover. And how do we help them get into the frame of mind where there's hope for them internally that can occur, because we know it absolutely can. It's more a matter of whether it will or not, but we know it can.
Yeah. And hearing those stories, and I think it's in places like this, as you mentioned earlier, where you come into a place like this and you see, I'm not alone, because we all feel like when we come in, I'm the only military officer, I'm the only police officer, I'm the only airline pilot or FBI agent or any of those physician that this has happened to. And you absolutely are not the only one that has happened to. Many people suffer from this. And it's in a facility like this where you may be exposed to that for the first time. I know that was true with me. And then you can go out and be that advocate to the others that are around you that are suffering. Because wherever you are in your life role, profession, society, there are people in your world that are suffering. That is the thing that really shocked me when I came into recovery, is how many other people were going through what I was going through.
Yeah, I think more importantly, and perhaps like the parting sentiment should be, there are many people suffering from this, but there are many people recovering from this and living active, healthy, happy, wholesome lives in recovery. And I think that's what we expose people to. So we not only expose people to the fact that there are others suffering like them, but there are examples of recovery walking around this place every day. You're one of those today.
And you guys are too.
Yeah, we try to be. But, we all get to share in that. And what a gift that we get to be in a place and experience each other that way.
Yeah, to reduce that stigma that you talked about, which is improving, but it's slow, at kind of glacial speed. There's still a tremendous amount of stigma out there. If we focus on that recovery rather than focusing on the substance use disorder and all the consequences thereof, we're going to get into a better place. We want to show people what recovery looks like. You mentioned how you being open about it in your life, you are then able to help more, to help more people, because they understand what's going on with you and they come to you and seek that help from you.
Yeah, because that's where it's all going to begin. Even if it's just you point them to a recovery facility or a program, they're first going to hear it from somebody that they know, that they trust, that they've developed a relationship with. And that's where it's all going to begin. But guys, thank you so much for doing this. I know this was a long time in coming. I was looking forward to it.
So are we. Yeah.
And it has been fantastic. And I hope we do some more of these, because this is very, very important information for people that are out there. And I know in this particular podcast, we do a lot of interviews of people who have gotten into recovery successfully, oftentimes after a number of starts and stops, and then they finally get through. And that's what we need to hear. We need to hear those examples. And you guys have really passed on a lot of information, particularly on the scientific side of this. And people need to, have that information so they are convinced that this is the best way to live. And by the way, we're always looking for the easier, softer, gentler way of living life. Hey, folks, if you're struggling with addiction, believe it or not, recovery is the easier, softer, gentler way of living life. I know it is for the three of us. Yeah.
Thanks, Mike, for what you do, though.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for it. You guys take care. Again, this is Mike Van Meter, Recovery is Possible, up here at Ashley Addiction Treatment Center up in Maryland. And if you want to know more information about Ashley, go ahead and look them up online, and you can find out all the information that you'd like. You guys take care of yourselves, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.